Hi everyone, I am Erin Houston, Director of Partnerships at Devex, and I am joined here today by Dr. Zita Rosenberg, the founding CEO of the International Partnership for Microbicides. Thank you so much, Zita, for being here today.
Very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. And I'm sure most of our viewers know exactly what IPM is, but for those of you who do not, it is a product development partnership to prevent HIV transmission by accelerating the development and availability of safe and effective microbicides for women in developing countries. Did I get that right?
You got it perfectly. Thanks.
Excellent, excellent. So you probably are well aware that Devex's portion of Women Deliver Live, we are really focused on private sector engagement and what that really means in terms of partnership. And so I want to kick us off just by asking you to share with us a little bit more about the structure of IPM as a product development partnership. Go ahead.
Well, when we were first created, our goal was to develop microbicides in some form, either a gel or a ring or some formulation to prevent HIV infection. But in order for a microbicide to work, it has to have a very active drug. And the groups that had the very active drugs were the pharmaceutical companies. So we knew right away that for us to be successful, we needed to partner with the private sector and with big pharma, which many times can seem very intimidating. But we were really fortunate to have very good interactions with Janssen Pharmaceuticals. It was then Tibotec in the very early days. And they actually worked really closely with us to help develop the agreement that we would then use with other pharmaceutical companies. So they became our ally, and it was just so helpful because as a nonprofit you have to learn the language of other groups in order to have a good partnership. And they taught us the language in a very patient way. And we've been good partners since then, and hopefully will be for the future. So our interactions, and I was an academic and in the public sector, and so my view was, private sector, big bad pharma, and I have come...
Quite controversial in 2002 when you
Absolutely,
started. Right.
And I've come full circle that they are not big bad pharma. They are really committed to working with the for-profit sector and with governments to try to get the products that people need and to them. So it was a very nice revelation for a pretty critical person as myself.
Great. And can you walk us through an example of one of the products that you've developed and perhaps some of the building blocks that it took to get there?
Sure. So we're looking at vaginal products for women, and we were developing gels that had active antiviral drugs in them. And as we were developing them, we realized that gels may not be easy for women to use because it may be difficult to hide from their partner if they wanted to hide it, and they'd have to have a gel with them when they were going to have sex. And women, especially in different parts of the world, don't know when or if they're going to have sex. They don't have control over that part of their lives. So we thought, well, maybe something that was more discreet would be better. And so the vaginal ring came about, and because that's something a woman could insert herself and leave in place, and her partner may never know it's there. If she wanted to keep it private, and if she wanted to share, she certainly could. And we thought it would be easier for women because they could just wear it and not worry about having it or being found out to have it in the house. So there were a lot of reasons why it made sense. And there aren't that many rings that are out there on the market. There are contraceptive rings and there are hormone replacement rings. But we couldn't find really a manufacturer to truly kind of help us get to where we needed to be. There were some who helped start with us, but they couldn't really go all the way with us. And so we thought, and I remember this, that sometimes when you're naive, it really is helpful because you're not afraid, because you don't know enough to be scared. So the naivete came about that I thought, well, how hard can it be to develop a ring? And I remember my staff thinking, it's not that easy. I said, well, what do you need? And they said, you need like a 1-ton ring press. And I said, okay, well, let's set it up. We had a little facility that was developing gels, and so we bought the ring press, and we had to raise the roof and put in new air conditioning systems for our unit and air handlers, and we started making rings, and within probably a year we had rings for our first clinical trial.
Wow.
But if I had known now what I knew then, I probably wouldn't have done it. So it's really a good thing. I mean, naivete really helps.
Yeah, I'm hearing you say naivete. I'm also hearing you mentioned language to be able to speak with partners, but there's also a certain element of human-centered design that's a big part of this.
Well, and thinking about what
exactly.
women want, although I must say we have not done nearly enough that a pharma company say would do. I mean, before, because here we are, a small nonprofit, and we're assuming that this makes sense. And so we did some acceptability studies with women in the field with placebo rings, and found that women did like it, and they were able to insert the rings themselves and take them out, and felt that they were comfortable. But again, we only did it with a few hundred women. We didn't do it with thousands, and so we did take a big risk in moving forward. Every step of the way, I think another good lesson is you got to take risks.
Right.
I mean, if you just go with something that's safe, none of these products would ever be developed.
Yeah, it's very private sector mentality to be able to take that risk.
Right. But even in this case, I don't even think the private sector would have taken this risk, because this was for a population of women who can't afford to buy it. So there's no financial incentive for companies to take the risk, and there's only liability from their perspective, right? If the ring doesn't prevent infection all the time, or if a woman doesn't use it and gets infected, is that a liability to the company? And back in 2002, liability was something that was really on top of their minds. I think they've evolved to a huge extent. But so they did, we could take the risk because we were a nonprofit, and we just thought, well, you can't just say it's too difficult. You just have to figure out how to do it.
Yeah. So you did this trial with, it sounds like 100 women.
What, for acceptability? Yep,
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit more about the scalability of your product development and how that comes into play?
Right. So what happens first is you figure out whether anyone will use your product, and then you go, and that was with a ring that didn't contain any drug. Okay. And then we started with a ring that did contain drug, and you do very small safety studies to make sure there's no problems. And those studies were done in Belgium, because you want to do it in places where you have very tight control over the safety, and make sure that you're doing all of the studies needed to make sure it's safe. And then once we figured it was safe and we saw that, then we went into larger phase 2 studies in Africa and the women who would be the beneficiaries of the ring. And we did it in about 15 research centers in probably 6 countries. And so we got a wide variety of feedback and, importantly, the safety data in the context of where it would be used. Everything came back looking great. And that's when we made the decision to go into the phase 3 of the trials, which is when you enroll thousands of women and you're looking to see whether or not it works to prevent infection. And so we just ended those studies.
Great.
And we are excited by the fact that the ring does prevent infection. It wasn't as high as we would have liked to have seen, but it's significantly protected in both studies, and it's sufficient for us to go for regulatory approval. And what we've learned is that the reason for the lower than expected efficacy is that many women, for a variety of reasons, chose not to use the ring in the study. And so for the women who use the ring, it looks like it's highly efficacious. But for those who didn't, obviously, if you don't use something, it's not going to work. And in a phase 3 trial, that happens because every month you're telling women, we don't know if this product works, don't know if you're on a placebo, and we don't know if it's safe, because the safety really is only after thousands and thousands of women. And so you could see how especially young women might think, why am I using this? Or why do I want to use this? And could this compromise my future reproductive ability? And so women chose to enroll in the trials for lots of different reasons, some of which is just access to medical care.
Yeah.
Because in these areas, that is a benefit in and of itself.
Right.
But,
so you started in 2002 with Janssen.
Yes. Well, actually, Janssen was 2004.
2004,
yes.
okay.
Yes, but we started the organization in 2002.
Okay, so about 12 years of partnership. Can you describe some of the other partners that you have and some of the success stories that you've had around partners?
Sure.
With private sector, with research organizations, really anything that you think has led to the success of IPM?
Well, in order to carry out these studies, all of the studies, we have to have committed research partners, clinical research partners everywhere. So I mentioned that we did some studies in Belgium, but the studies in Africa were sometimes with partners that we engaged and had to build the capacity for from the very beginning. So some clinics already existed, some we built de novo with them, and gave them the money for all of the clinic space, the laboratories, helped them get qualified with their laboratory, get accredited with their laboratory, taught capacity building and financial systems to be able to manage all the donor funds, and even in just management itself, because clinicians and scientists aren't innately the best managers of organizations, of people, and it's a skill. And so we even brought in management consultants to help them set up these organizations, because women who enroll in these studies know when there's a good functioning team, a well-functioning team that can support them. And if there isn't, they don't want to be in the studies. And so it was our obligation to support these participants, because if they didn't enroll, we would have no product. So the academic and the research partners are really critical, because they are going to help us with the trials that we're going to continue to do to find out how best to support women to use the ring and an eventual rollout of the ring.
Yeah, and you yourself have 30 plus years of experience in this space, formerly at FHI, before that NIH.
NIH, yes.
How much in that career before IPM did that influence your decision making, your leadership?
Well, hugely, because even before HIV, this is how old I am, even before HIV, I was working on viruses of the same class that HIV belongs to. So even before we knew there was an HIV, I was working on cat viruses of the same class, along with people working on monkey viruses and mouse viruses. And so we were all part of this very small group of retrovirologists, and I was a grad student and then a postdoc. But so when HIV emerged, it was just natural. I mean, just like, of course, this is what I would work on. It's the most important thing to work on. And I remember my daughter asking me, how did you know back then what you wanted to do? I said, I had no clue. In fact, HIV didn't exist. So you just kind of or be aware of opportunities, and to see how you would just kind of morph and go. I never had a 5 or 10 year plan in my life, not even a 2-year plan. I would just kind of go with what interests me and what was important. So, coming to NIH at the beginning of the HIV epidemic and getting to work with Tony Fauci and some of the brilliant researchers who were just kind of finding out everything about HIV and growing with them, it just was kind of a natural segue. And for me, I was trained in public health, so prevention always made the most sense. And so to gravitate towards prevention is just in my bent. And then as a woman, and probably as a feminist since I was born, being able to work on a women's health issue, I mean, it just combines everything I'm passionate about. So I've literally have the best job in the world.
That's fantastic.
I do.
That's fantastic. So we've heard a little bit about where you've been, where IPM is right now. I want to ask you to put your future hat on and envision for us what's next for IPM. What does the future look like? What's the next challenge?
Yeah. Well, the huge challenge now is for a very small nonprofit like us to get regulatory approval of Depivarine ring. So, as everyone had told me, getting the ring through phase 3 trials, as hard as that may be, is going to pale in comparison to what you need to do to get the ring on the market. And so the first step is regulatory approval and putting together the dossier. And we're getting a lot of help, again, from Janssen, from lots of our partners in doing that. And at the same time as that is going through the process, which will be several years process, we'll have studies going on in the field looking at how women can best use the ring. And then all of that will come together. So there's the public health path and the regulatory path, and that will come together hopefully in 2 years with recommendations, if we are very lucky, by WHO for its guidelines for its use, with ministers of health in the countries all agreeing that this makes a lot of sense to roll out. And then we will partner again with large numbers of organizations that have more experience than we do in rolling out products into sub-Saharan Africa, especially in the contraceptive field and elsewhere. And then, so while that's all moving, we're also developing a contraceptive Depivarine ring, which we think will have a lot of benefits for many women who choose to contracept and prevent HIV infection with one product. So that's our kind of goal, and we have other drugs that we're going to put into rings, and because I think we need to realize, like as in most infectious diseases, for HIV, if you are not one step or two steps ahead of the virus, you're going to fail. And so making sure we have other drugs and products in the pipeline is going to be critical.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for
You
your
are
work,
very
for your
welcome.
time here today.
You're very welcome.
It's a pleasure,
Thank you.
and I'm excited to see what IPM achieves in the future.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.